folks. Welcome back to the Stick to the Script podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Perales, and today we're going to be talking about yet another recent movie release in theaters. The movie we're going to be talking about on this episode is Mandalorian and Grogu. So buckle up because we're about to do a deep dive into what makes this movie what it is. One of the key elements of storytelling across any medium is the character arc. Isn't it funny and crazy how even big name Hollywood writers and executives somehow manage to miss out on including this crucial element in the stories that they tell? Unfortunately, this omission of important information and story ideas is something that The Mandalorian and Grogu suffers from heavily. Now, this movie is already at a disadvantage due to the fact that to really understand it, you have to binge several seasons of a streaming service show in order to have any idea what's going on. And in addition to that, the characters that we follow are not exactly most in-depth or complex by professional storytelling standards. They're fairly one-dimensional, and some might argue that their story ended in the show long ago and that it's being dragged out. Me personally, I believe this is the case, as we saw in Season 2, that the father-son bond between the Mandalorian and Grogu, aka Baby Yoda, came to an emotional conclusion when the Mandalorian finally got Grogu help from a Jedi of his own kind to be taken away to train to use his powers for good. It was an emotional farewell and definitely could have served as the end of the series. However, they wanted to make more episodes and eventually a movie. The problem with continuing a story after you've already reached a wonderful conclusion, however, is that sometimes it's hard to figure out where to go. And that's one of the biggest issues that plagued The Mandalorian and Grogu. It didn't know what it wanted to do. Now, was there a plot? Yes, there was. They had to go rescue the son of Jabba the Hutt from a crime syndicate. Turned out that he didn't want to be rescued, and they got involved in some bounty hunter shenanigans. However, if we take a look at the overall emotional narrative, there's really not that much substance. The strongest story beats had already been touched upon and resolved in the show, which again was that father-son relationship. So what was left for the movie? Not much. The two main characters are, of course, the Mandalorian and Grogu, and they're the ones who should be the most fleshed out. But they really weren't. There are a handful of other side characters, and none of them are really fleshed out either. In fact, one of them, Zeb, is a character from an entirely different show that also had several seasons that you would have to watch to understand more about him. There was another character played by Sigourney Weaver, and she did the best she could with the script she was given, being a talented, respected actress, but not memorable in the slightest. And the other main character was the son of Jabba the Hutt, Rada the Hutt. Ironically, out of everyone in this movie, I would have to say that he got the most character development, as we learned about his backstory and feeling like he was in his father's shadow to carving out a name for himself in the gladiator ring. As for the two main characters, there wasn't any sort of growth with them. Nothing that hasn't been touched on in the show, which is really the only idea that was expanded upon at all, was the idea of Grogu having to stand on his own once his mentor was not around. Everything else, though, there was no character growth for really either of these characters. Normally, stories are supposed to have beginning, middle, end, rising action, climax, and that goes for the character journey too. There's supposed to be a lesson learned. There's supposed to be distinct growth of this character that is anchoring your story from the beginning to the end. There needs to be some sort of transformation. And that didn't happen for either of the titular characters. The Mandalorian experienced no emotional growth, nor emotional turmoil. Everything that he did in this movie was plot-based, surface level, in service of the plot. There was nothing done for his personal development. As for Grogu, similar issue. He at least had the benefit of being the younger character, which, automatically kind of lends itself to coming of age themes. But even so, they explored these themes in possibly the most surface level way you can. They had a brief bit about Grogu having to take care of the Mandalorian while he was injured, and there was nothing new shown or learned. The audience didn't learn anything new about Grogu, and he didn't learn anything new about himself. And, he's the one who should have been going through the most development, being the younger one, but he didn't. And, overall, this is the biggest issue with this movie, is that it was all style and no substance. Because believe me, this movie was very nice to look at. It was nice to listen to. There was a lot of really cool action and effects, but there wasn't much in the way of story, at least beyond the superficial plot. And even then, the plot, the surface level plot, was a bit hard to keep up with at times. The goals kept shifting drastically as new information was learned, and not in a way that was done very tactfully. Overall, this movie chooses flash over real meaty, nitty-gritty writing and development of its characters. There's so many parts of it that even I struggle to remember, having seen it in theaters twice. It just isn't a very strong piece of writing overall, and the biggest factor that contributes to that is the lack of character work worked in throughout the movie. Today we discussed why The Mandalorian and Grogu fell short of typical storytelling conventions. We learned that it's really important to make sure that your story revolves around more than plot, and also make sure to service its characters in addition to that. We learned that it's crucial for characters to go through development and not for them to stay the same. We also learned that even though cool style is important, substance is just as, if not more, important. Thank you for joining us on today's episode, folks. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about yet another recent Hollywood release, Supergirl. There, we'll be discussing why this movie doesn't deserve the bad rap that it gets, and why, when you look closely, there's actually some very nice character work going on. Until next time, thank you for joining. I'm your host, Joshua Perales, and I wish you all a wonderful day from the Stick to the Script podcast.